When you watch a really gripping piece of investigative journalism, there is always that one specific moment where they take you to a crime scene.
Oh, yeah, like right at the beginning.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And at first glance, everyone thinks they know exactly what happened. I mean, the narrative just seems completely set in stone.
Yeah.
You look at the evidence, and the conclusion feels so, obvious.
Great. The scene feels clean. The evidence looks straightforward. The motives of everyone involved seem perfectly clear. And as an observer, you just feel this deep sense of certainty about the entire situation.
But then the journalist pulls on one tiny, seemingly insignificant loose thread.
Yeah, and the whole thing unravels.
Exactly. Suddenly the whole story flips upside down. You realize you were looking at the wrong motive entirely. Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are pulling on a massive loose thread today for you regarding something we all think we understand. Prisons.
Yeah, it is a topic surrounded by decades of assumptions. And today, we are going to challenge the very foundation of how these institutions operate based on a stack of, frankly, fascinating sources we've been compiling.
Because, if you follow politics, you have heard the debate a million times. We have this deeply ingrained political narrative about what these buildings with the heavy iron gates are actually for.
Right, the classic left versus right debate.
Exactly. On the right wing, prisons are typically viewed primarily as instruments of punishment and deterrence. It is about consequences.
And then in contrast, the left wing tends to view prisons as places for rehabilitation, like a facility to help people reform and re-enter society.
Right. And to be clear, we are not here today to pick a side on which of those philosophies is correct. That's not the point.
No, we are looking at what happens when the actual system running the buildings doesn't care about either of them.
Yeah, because almost nobody, regardless of their political leanings, associates the administration of justice with the word profit.
It just doesn't compute for most people.
No, it doesn't. And that is the paradigm shift we are exploring today. We assume that, much like the police or the courts, prisons are simply administered by some branch of the government.
Which makes sense. That's how it's supposed to work.
Right. But what if the primary goal of the facility wasn't punishment and it wasn't rehabilitation either? What if the underlying motive of the system was simply generating revenue?
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are going to investigate the privatization of the Australian prison system.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. We're going to unpack the hidden mechanics of a business model that treats inmates as a literal revenue stream and explore how this relentless corporate profit motive directly conflicts with making your community safer.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand the sheer scale of this profit motive, we first have to, locate where it is happening the most.
And the answer to that completely defies all expectations.
It really does. Because when we talk about the corporatization of justice, the mind automatically goes to one place. You instantly picture the United States.
Right. The assumption makes total sense given America's global reputation for highly commercialized systems. But the data tells a deeply surprising story here.
It's wild.
Yeah. Australia actually has a higher percentage of its prison population in privately run corporate facilities than any other country in the Western world.
I was absolutely floored by the gap in those numbers when I read the source. I mean, in the United States, less than 10% of the prison population is currently housed in private facilities.
Which is still a lot of people, but yeah.
But in Australia, at the time of this writing, it is over 20%. More than double the rate of the U.S.
Over a fifth of the entire incarcerated population.
So naturally, I started digging into the specific contracts. You look at Victoria, South Australia, and New South Wales, and you would think the names on the paperwork would be like local state agencies. But who exactly is holding the keys to these facilities?
Well, the administration is dominated by four massive private multinationals. They're known as the Big Four. That's Serco, G4S, Geo Group, and MTC Broad Spectrum.
So not local government bureaus at all.
Not at all. These are the heavyweights of the global private security industry, and we really need to look at how these deals are actually structured to understand the gravity of the situation.
Right, because we aren't talking about small year-to-year agreements.
No, we are talking about massive, decade-long contracts. To give you a snapshot of the current financial scale, together, these four companies are set to receive over $500 million this year alone for their services in Australia.
$500 million
In a
single year.
Exactly. And because they are largely international businesses, a massive portion of that taxpayer money is being sent right back to corporate headquarters in England and the USA.
It's just a wild concept to wrap your head around. A foreign corporation having direct financial sway over the physical freedom of Australian citizens.
It fundamentally changes the dynamic of justice.
But it brings us to the most crucial question, right?
Yeah.
Why did Australian politicians push for this privatization more aggressively than American ones? Like, how did we get to 20%?
It all goes back to the mechanics of government budgets. Think about it. If a state needs to build a new prison to handle a growing population, that requires a massive upfront capital expenditure.
Right, like hundreds of millions of dollars to build a concrete fortress.
Exactly. And politicians generally do not want a massive expense like that sitting on their balance sheet, especially during an election year.
Oh, of course. It looks terrible on a budget report.
Right. So instead of the government building and running it, they sign a contract with a private company. The company takes on the construction and the daily operations, and in return, the government agrees to pay them a steady, lucrative fee over 10 or 20 years.
Ah, so it essentially acts as a giant state-sponsored credit card.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, it hides the true cost of the infrastructure up front while guaranteeing the corporation a massive payout over time. Which brings us to how these companies actually make their money once the doors open.
Because the business model itself is where things get really dark.
Right. And there's this irony that completely broke my brain when I was looking into this. Put aside the moral issues for a second and just look at the pure financial paradox.
Yeah, the superannuation thing.
Yes. Okay, let's say a person is convicted of a crime and sent to one of these private facilities. If that person has a superannuation account, which is, essentially their retirement fund invested in the broader market, they might actually hold a vested financial stake in the very company that is currently keeping them locked in a cell.
What's fascinating here is how this highlights the underlying nature of these institutions. It is a surreal encapsulation of how deeply embedded this industry is in the financial sector.
I mean, you could theoretically be earning dividends off your own incarceration.
Right, through your retirement portfolio. They are not public services. They are publicly traded or growth-driven corporate entities. And the fundamental rule of any corporate model is that you must demonstrate continuous financial growth to your shareholders.
But how do you demonstrate growth in a prison? It reminds me of, treating inmates like cattle on a farm.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If you run a dairy farm, you need a large, steady herd to keep the milk flowing and the revenue growing. The cattle are the product. In this model, if the goal is endless growth, the companies inherently need more people incarcerated to expand their revenue pool. So if the crime rate decreases in the community, do these companies just make less money because they don't have enough cattle?
That is where the contracts become incredibly controversial. To shield these companies from the financial risk of a dropping crime rate, governments often agreed to what are essentially minimum occupancy guarantees.
Wait. Are you saying the state guarantees a certain number of filled cells?
In many of these privatization deals globally, and specifically in the frameworks we see across various jurisdictions, there are clauses that ensure the private operator is paid for a certain baseline capacity, regardless of whether those beds are actually filled.
That is unbelievable.
And beyond that baseline, they are paid a fixed daily amount per head. So every single inmate, whether they are in for a violent crime or a minor traffic offense, is viewed through the exact same financial lens, as a daily unit of revenue.
That completely redefines the incentive structure.
Entirely.
If your goal as a CEO is endless financial growth year after year to please your investors, you inherently need high occupancy. In fact, you need the prison population to expand. The foreign corporations structurally need more citizens locked in cells to grow.
But revenue is only half of the corporate equation, though. The other half is expenses.
Right.
Because the state pays them a fixed daily rate per prisoner, the company cannot simply raise the prices they charge the government whenever they want to boost their profit margin.
So if the revenue per head is relatively fixed by the contract, the only way a corporation can widen its profit margins to keep shareholders happy is to ruthlessly slash its operating costs.
And this is where the profit motive directly collides with human welfare. To maximize their dividends, these facilities often operate on incredibly tight margins when it comes to the actual conditions inside.
So they're cutting corners.
Huge corners. They frequently provide the absolute minimum required staffing levels. They skimp on daily supplies, and they defer costly maintenance.
Yeah, the source text specifically calls out medical supplies and facility renovations.
Yeah.
I mean, from a purely corporate perspective, buying high-quality medical equipment or fixing a deteriorating housing block That detracts from the bottom line. It eats into the cash flow.
Exactly. Every dollar spent on an inmate is a dollar that doesn't go to a shareholder.
But wait, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Isn't the ultimate goal of the justice system to rehabilitate offenders so they don't come back? I mean, surely the government tracks the success rate of these places. If a company is cutting corners so badly that the facility is failing at its job, why would the state just cancel the contract?
Because the free market usually punishes failure, right?
Exactly. If a restaurant serves terrible food, it goes out of business.
Well, the free market only punishes failure when there is actual competition. But the private prison industry operates as an oligopoly.
Ah, right. There's only the big four.
Exactly. There are only a handful of multinational corporations with the capital and the specialized security clearance to run a maximum security facility. You cannot just hire a local tech startup to take over a prison.
So true.
Once a state signs a 20-year contract and hands over the keys, they are locked in. The government becomes entirely dependent on the corporation, making it incredibly difficult and legally perilous to terminate a contract, even if the outcomes are poor.
So the state is essentially trapped in a bad marriage with a foreign corporation.
Pretty much.
And while they are trapped, the corporation is slashing overhead. Which brings us to the most expensive overhead of all. Rehabilitation.
Yes. Because rehabilitative programs cost serious money.
You need trained psychologists, specialized educators, drug counseling resources. None of that is cheap.
All of which are viewed strictly as financial liabilities by the corporate headquarters. Spending money on an addiction counselor eats into the profit margin just as much as fixing a leaking roof.
So they just don't do it.
As a result, these essential programs are often neglected, they're understaffed, or they are stripped down to the absolute bare minimum required by the contract.
So what does this all mean? If a prison actually hires that psychologist and an inmate addresses their trauma, gets sober, and genuinely turns their life around, the prison loses a repeat customer.
This raises an important question. Why would a corporation ever want to invest heavily in a process that actively depletes its own customer base?
They wouldn't.
Right. And the text refers to these inmates using a deeply unsettling corporate term.
Oh yeah, cash cows. It's such a chilling way to describe a human being.
It is, but financially that is the exact role they play. Empty beds mean bad end-of-year financial reports. The companies that operate these facilities stand to benefit the most when a person reoffends and is sent back. They only stand to lose future revenue if a criminal successfully reintegrates into society. The more people that remain trapped in the cycle of the justice system, the better the corporate financial report looks. Rehabilitating inmates would quite literally put them out of business.
It makes the very concept of rehabilitation inherently counterproductive to their existence, which is terrifying when you realize the ripple effects of that logic. If these private prisons are financially disincentivized from fixing the root causes of criminal behavior, the inevitable result is that those individuals are released back into your community without having changed at all.
The profit-making mechanisms of the corporation actively shift the long-term cost of crime back onto the society that hosts it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you have to look at how this was originally sold to the public in the first place.
You have political spin.
Yeah. If you look back at the political promises used to justify handing over 20% of the prison population to private companies, the entire pitch was based on efficiency and saving taxpayer money.
The primary argument presented to voters was that outsourcing management to the private sector would be far more economical than government-run facilities.
Right. Politicians assured the public that these corporations were, quote, experts in logistics and security, and that the free market would inherently trim the bureaucratic fat.
Just let the businesses handle it, they'll do it cheaper.
Exactly. We were told that nothing significant would change about the justice aspect, but the bottom line for the taxpayer would drop. And let's be completely honest about human nature here. It was an easy political sell.
Oh, absolutely. Very few people want to stick their neck out to advocate for convicted criminals.
Right. So if a politician stands at a podium and promises to lock them up for less of your tax money, the public usually nods along and stops paying attention.
But the source material we are examining is unequivocal about the reality of that promise. It was fundamentally incorrect.
Completely false.
State expenses regarding corrections did not decrease. They actually increased over time.
So we handed over control to international businesses, watched the profits flow overseas, and we're left with a growing, bloated expense list anyway.
Yes. But the financial failure of the policy is only one layer. The human cost And the cost to community safety is significantly worse.
Because they aren't rehabilitating anyone. The areas in Australia that rely heavily on for-profit prisons are seeing a massive crisis in repeat offenders. The most glaring proof of this systemic failure is happening right now in New South Wales.
The numbers there are just staggering.
At the time of this research, New South Wales boasts the highest recidivism rate in the entire country. 48% of inmates return to jail within just 2 years of being released.
Almost half. Almost half of the individuals exiting the system are committing new crimes and returning to a cell within 24 months.
I mean, if a commercial airline built a plane where the engines failed 48% of the time, the entire company would be grounded and dismantled immediately.
Oh, the executives would be in jail.
Exactly. But in this industry, a 48% failure rate is just considered a steady pipeline of returning customers. Let's bring this home for a second and connect the dots on what a 48% failure rate actually means for you, the listener, just walking down the street.
Because it's not just a spreadsheet error.
No, it is easy to hear that number and think of it as a sterile statistic. But how does that failure translate into real-world danger? When people get out of prison without job skills, without addiction treatment, and without any psychological support, they don't just quietly disappear.
No, they become desperate.
They get recruited into street-level gangs. And those street gangs act as the foot soldiers for larger organized crime syndicates.
The cascading effect of failing to rehabilitate even a fraction of that population feeds directly into the larger criminal ecosystem.
Exactly. And the source notes that in 2021 alone, organized crime was estimated to cost the Australian public around $60 billion a year.
$60 billion! Let that sink in.
It's massive. And we see the human toll of this pipeline every day on the news. Look at the situation in Victoria right now.
Yeah, the text specifically highlights the sheer volume of carjackings and violent home invasions happening across the state.
It doesn't even feel like a localized crime wave anymore. It feels like an epidemic. People are genuinely terrified in their own homes, double-checking their locks, worried that someone is going to kick in their front door for the keys to their car.
And when a community feels that level of fear, they rightfully demand answers. They want to know why the system is failing to protect them.
But the tragedy of this situation is that the public anger is almost always directed at the wrong target.
Which brings us to a really crucial synthesis of this entire deep dive.
Yeah. Over the past 5 years, we have seen a massive wave of public criticism directed squarely at judges and the judiciary system as a whole. You hear it on talk radio every day.
Oh, constantly. People blame the bail laws. They say magistrates are too soft on crime, handing out lenient sentences.
Right. But we have to separate the responsibilities of the justice system here. People are sent to prison for 2 distinct reasons: to be punished for unacceptable behavior and to be rehabilitated so they do not do it again.
Right. And the punishment phase, the sentencing, the loss of freedom, the actual time mandated, that is the responsibility of the judge.
The judge does their job. They hand down the sentence and remove the person from society.
But the rehabilitation, the actual hard work of changing a criminal's behavior, that is supposed to happen inside the facility during the years they are locked away.
Exactly.
So instead of solely blaming a judge for a massive crime wave, our sources argue we should be heavily scrutinizing the corporate entities that are failing at the rehabilitation phase.
It is the foreign CEO running the for-profit prison who is failing the public. They are the ones prioritizing corporate dividends by cutting the very programs designed to prevent reoffending.
Right. They are essentially taking in dangerous people, warehousing them for a few years without fixing any of their underlying issues, and then releasing those, quote, cash cows back into your neighborhood.
And they do it knowing full well the person is likely to reoffend. Because when they do, the corporation gets paid all over again to lock them back up.
It is a stunning realization when you step back and look at the whole board.
It really is. Before we wrap up our analysis today, though, we should be clear about the parameters of what our sources are saying here.
Yes, a quick disclaimer check is definitely needed.
Yeah.
Right.
While this deep dive has named specific multinational companies involved in the Australian for-profit prison industry, namely Serco, G4S, Geo Group, and MTC Broad Spectrum, this discussion is examining industry-wide practices and the systemic issues of the for-profit model itself.
Right. The sources do not allege any specific illegal wrongdoing by any of the individual companies named.
Exactly. The focus is purely on the broader systemic paradox, where corporate profit motives inherently misalign with the societal goal of reducing crime. It is about the structure of the game, not just the players on the field.
Well said.
So let's look back at the journey we've been on today. We started by looking at our basic political expectations of prisons, whether you believe they should be about strict punishment or compassionate rehabilitation.
Then we uncovered that geographical shocker.
Yeah, Australia's staggering reality of having over 20% of its prison population locked in privately run corporate facilities, far surpassing the commercialization seen in the United States.
And finally, we arrived at the dark truth of the business mechanisms.
Right. Treating human beings as fixed-rate revenue streams inherently conflicts with making society safer. Cutting costs on medical care and psychology programs just to please foreign shareholders ensures that the recidivism rate stays near 50%.
And the public ends up bearing the massive burden of that $60 billion organized crime ecosystem. It forces you to fundamentally change how you view the infrastructure of justice.
It really does.
Once you introduce a profit margin, it is no longer just a legal process.
Yep.
It operates as a marketplace.
And in any marketplace, the business wants repeat customers. Think back to the start of this deep dive, to that investigative journalist standing at the crime scene.
Looking at the obvious clues.
Exactly. We walked in thinking the primary motive for the prison system was justice. But pulling on that loose thread revealed the hidden motive was actually corporate profit.
It shifts everything.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We now know that our current privately run system financially rewards failure, literally paying out steady, guaranteed dividends when a person reoffends, remains broken, and returns to a cell. But what would happen if we forced the market to flip that incentive entirely? What would a justice system look like if these billion-dollar corporations only received their highest payouts when an inmate successfully reintegrated into society and never came back?